Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
On Ask the A&Ps, you ask your toughest maintenance questions, and we do our very best to answer them. So if you have a tough maintenance question, please email it to us at podcasts@aopa.org for a chance to be on the show.
Please follow and subscribe to be alerted when a new show comes out, and they don't have to be tough questions. I'm an advocate for an easy one now and then. Thank you.
Make us look good, please.
Yes, right.
And if you'd like to get on our email list, and we've been sending out quite a bit of interesting email stuff lately, easiest way to do that is text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777. And then your phone will ask you for your name and email address and put you on our list. So once again, text SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777 to get on our mailing list.
So I have a question. So I read a lot of airworthiness directives, and I try to make it a point to owners that they don't have to call me to find out if the AD applies to them, because they can read the ADs themselves. You know, it's not smoke and mirrors until sometimes it is. So this is a question for Overthinkers Anonymous. And we were talking with Ian earlier about this AD on the Piper wing spars and how complicated figuring out when it's due. So this is a very light version of that, and it's an AD on the Cessna 210. Of course, I work a lot on those. This is AD 2012-10-4.
Well, it's an old one.
It's an old one, yeah, and it's on the wing spar, since we were talking about the Piper. So this is not the wing carry-through spar that's in the cabin. This is the lower spar cap of the left and the right wing, and it's just a visual inspection. And it's just
right?
Oh, you don't even have to do that. I use my phone, but you can just look at it. You can almost see it directly. But so it's a real simple inspection. It takes maybe 30 seconds per wing if it's already clean.
And he charges a full hour for this, probably on.
Well, yeah, you know.
Well, he's got to remove inspection plates. So
that's right. The panel. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. So, but there are 3 times at which this has to, or 3 possible times. So they start off with airplanes with 10,000 hours or more after June 5th, 2012. You do so-and-so, and you've got so much time to do that. And there are quite a few 210s out there with over 10,000 hours.
Wow.
And it says before further flight after June 5th, 2012. So you have from whatever date the AD was issued until June 5th to get it done. So that's all passed and everything's good. And then the second one is for airplanes with 5,000 hours or more, but less than 10,000. Then you're going to go do this, and you have a certain amount of time within that as of June 5th of 2012. So there's a space in there. It's 25 hours. You get 25 hours or June 5th to get this done. But the last one is the one that I find interesting. And it says, because we have a lot of airplanes that don't have 5,000 hours yet. So it says for airplanes with less than 5,000 hours as of June 5th of 2012, when the airplane reaches 5,000 hours or within the next 25 hours after June 5th of 2012, whichever occurs later.
Later, right.
Okay, so the calendar date's done. Now we're just waiting for 5,000 hours. But it never says, it just says, it doesn't say before 5,000 hours. It doesn't say within 25 hours of 5,000 hours. It says at 5,000 hours. So one thing, and I know this is getting real touchy, but I make this point. I just did a 210 class out in Corona, California, and I'm trying to explain to the Cessna 210 owner group, you want this inspection done every annual, but don't document the inspection until the airplane gets to 5,000 hours, because if a mechanic sees or an inspector sees that the inspection was done at 2,500 hours, then they may say, oh, it's done, I don't have to do it. And the point is to get it done as close to 5,000 as possible, because
but not over.
but not over. So in the overthinking process, it's like it has to be at 5,000 hours. I'm just wondering, in the world of who wrote this, it doesn't give any sort of
Wiggle
how
room?
early is too early.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't go past it, but how early is too early? And I don't have that number, but something more than 100 hours seems too early to me.
So either it was poorly written or it was an oversight, right?
Yeah, and I don't know.
Is this a one-time AD or a recurring AD?
Right, it's a one-time with reporting requirements. And this has to do with back in 2012 when they found 5 of these lower spar caps cracked down in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a real AD. It's a good one, and it's a simple one to do. You just clean it up, and literally it's just the first section of the spar cap.
My best guess is that the FAA wasn't worried about airplanes with under 5,000 hours. They didn't figure that anybody's going to find anything, so they didn't spend a lot of neurons trying to figure out how to word that part of it.
Right. So, but the other ones for, airplanes with over 5,000 hours, there's the calendar time, the 2012. So now we're way past that, but we have a big percentage of the fleet that still have less than 5,000 hours. And I don't want people complying with the AD at 4,000 and then not doing it at 5, which is kind of my thing. It was just written to me in a strange way. Yeah. Not as bad as the Piper wing spar AD, but still, it's,
Yeah,
but it's a one-time AD. So
yes.
if an owner were to do it at 500 hours total time in service, it's new. He never has to do it again.
That's the problem. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wait, you can do it at 500 hours?
So so that's part of the question. It says for airplanes with less than 5,000 hours, when the airplane reaches 5,000 hours. So it doesn't say 4,000. It actually says when the aircraft reaches 5,000 hours or within the next 25 after June of 2012. So you have to do it at 5,000.
Yeah, you can't do it at 500.
If the airplane trips 5,000 hours on your way to the shop, then you're flying an unairworthy airplane.
That's a very strange AD then. Yeah.
So at 4,999, it's not.
It doesn't say not later than 5,000 hours.
Nope.
It says at.
It says when the airplane, in quotes, when the airplane reaches 5,000 hours or within the calendar time, whichever occurs later.
Yeah. So you got to time it just right on the way to the shop.
That's right.
It's a badly written AD.
You have to arrive at the shop at 5,000 hours. So just, hey, can you count taxi time? You just taxi around for a while.
Yeah, or just fly overhead the airport till it hits, till the numbers roll, and then you're like, okay, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I think it's poorly written, but I don't know. They could have come up with some other way to write it. But anyway, as an owner, you can read it yourself, but you have to read, and I'm one of the world's worst, as the two of you are very well aware, at reading something, and however it first hits my brain, that's how I take it. And then to read it differently the next day is really difficult for me to do.
Called the law of primacy.
Exactly. Yeah. And I am the worst offender, which is why I enjoy this podcast so much, because we start thinking stuff and I'm like, wait, I didn't read that right.
Well, you need
on the annual inspection, washing an airplane versus cleaning an airplane.
Cleaning.
Very different word.
Oh.
Well, Paul, I think you should write a letter to Laura Megan Tosh and ask about
for clarification on this
and
AD.
get clarification 2 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, been doing it wrong this whole time.
Oh,
Since 2012, they're going to have to go back and re-sign those logbooks.
There may be some listeners that don't know who Laura Megan Tosh is, but she's the top rulemaking lawyer in the FAA at the moment.
sure she's interested in hearing from Paul.
And she loves fan mail, you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure she's a listener too.
Oh, probably. We're in
Yeah.
big trouble now.
Well,
Now we're in
if
trouble.
if she's not, I bet she's going to be getting some suggestions to listen that we're taking her name in vain.
Yeah. Anyway,
It's a badly written AD.
badly, so I'll sign them off at whatever they show up as long as there's something above 4,900 hours.
You know,
Yeah.
I have this feeling that the FAA lately has been a little weak on proofreading. You know, they just let
Yeah.
stuff go out with.
This was
I remember-
2012, so.
I remember the days of ADs that were written on a half a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those
I
were
like those.
so simple back in the 60s and 70s. And then they just
Now
got
you need a PhD in AD
yeah.
reading. Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I'm waiting for an AD whose compliance time is based on the phase of the moon or something like that.
Don't encourage that kind of stuff. Someone will take you up on it.
Our first question is from Mike, who has an oil pump that doesn't want to pump. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, it's a Cessna bird dog that I've owned now for about 35 years. Actually, it's closer to 40 years. And I put a remanufactured engine in it back in 1969. And I noticed maybe close to 15 years ago, if I left the aircraft for maybe a month without using it, if we took a vacation in the winter and came back, I'd start the engine and I would get no oil pressure. Upon investigation, I found out that the oil screen cavity was empty. And over the years, I've developed a process using a hand oiler to actually pump oil into the cavity, and I could feel the resistance on the trigger. I turned the propeller over backwards. That was per some bulletin, I think, that a mechanic told me from Continental. And then I would start the engine and I would have oil pressure. Well, the situation has gotten worse over the years, and on two separate occasions, two IAs, a few years apart, completely took the oil pump assembly apart, figuring we'd find worn components, but we didn't. It actually looked like brand new. The oil pump assembly on this engine is very easy to get to. It's on the very back of the accessory case. I would imagine similar to the old E-Series Continental engines. This is unique, 0470-11 to this airframe, the Cessna 305 Bird Dog. And it seems to me that somehow air is infiltrating over time and gravity is just pulling the oil down from the oil pump, letting it go back into the oil tank. This is a dry sump engine. The tank in this engine just happens to be underneath the engine itself. But, the oil pump is up fairly high. And like I say, it becomes pretty frustrating. Now, on my last annual, which was in June, my IA mechanic, he said, we might try a Permatex sealant product called MotoSeal. And we put this on both sides of the copper crush gasket, both for the oil screen and also for the pressure regulator, where there are two different copper gaskets. And I think fortunately for me, I've been able to fly the airplane about once or twice a week, and I haven't really tested it by letting it sit for about a month. So there may have been something over the years that we've overlooked. We've pulled the pickup tube out of place, checked in any of the hose clamps, and it's just been a mystery to me all these years.
So I'll start with, I don't know what the problem is. but I have seen it on several different engines. Usually the older Continentals, the most impressive failure was on a local, one of our customers, a little 150 that unfortunately only flies about 5 or 6 hours per year. So he would come in, we'd do the annual. After the annual and the oil change, he had a remote oil filter, which adds to the complexity. And we would do the post. We usually didn't get to do a pre-run. We would do a run somewhere later in the process. We do the airframe inspection and then do a run and do checks, compression checks and all that. But when we did the run, we didn't find any oil pressure. And there'd be plenty of oil in the engine, and we would have to prime the pump, which is similar to what you're doing. And that seemed to work okay. We asked the owner about it. He said, oh, it's never been a problem. Apparently, it was related to us taking the oil filter off and all the pressure releasing. So we'd do the second, the post-maintenance run, and we'd get oil pressure because we had primed the pump on the engine coming in. Well, then the engine would sit for 2 or 3 months before he flew it. And unfortunately, on the last flight, he took off and came around, barely made it back to the runway because he never got oil pressure, but he never checked it. Subsequently, talking to John Jewell, who's an engine shop nearby that we've known for years, who, by the way, John is going to be retiring this year. In a few weeks, I'll be going to his retirement party.
Is the shop closing or?
No, there's a grandson that's going to be involved, and
That's great.
the daughter, Charlotte, is still going to be running things. And
Good.
so, yeah, it's all excellent. But, John is, he's tired. He just can't keep up with it. But at any rate, I called John because John knows these engines. And he said, yeah, that little 0200, if you let it sit too long and whatever you do, don't put a remote oil filter on it. I'm like, well, it has a remote oil filter. He said, oh, yeah, that's a really bad idea. But I never really got into the nuts and bolts with him about what allowed that to happen. But I think, Mike, what you're experiencing is exactly that. It's unpriming of the fuel pump.
Oil pump.
The oil pump. Sorry, the oil pump. It's just a couple of gears turning against each other.
Right.
So,
Air is getting in?
It's got to be air. Is like you put your finger over the straw, and somehow it's not a good seal, and the liquid is going down.
But why that engine or these engines and not other engines? Is it because the sump is on the very bottom or below? And
well, that's the same thing on the 0200.
Yeah.
It's got a separate little tank hanging underneath the engine. So I see, that's why I brought it up. I see the commonality, but I can't connect the dots for causality.
It was interesting. We had a situation, and I wasn't even aware that there was such a thing as an 0470 that was dry sump, but I guess it probably was a kind of an E-series engine. But we had a situation where with an oil pump losing prime on a Cessna 421.
Oh yeah,
that had been sitting for months because it was going through a long annual, and it went through the paint shop and stuff, and then when the mechanic tried to start the engines after the for the post annual engine run up, couldn't get any oil pressure. And interestingly enough, they called Continental and said, "What do we do?" And they said, "Oh yeah, that happens sometimes on those Gitzo engines if they sit for a long time." And what they recommended, which was kind of interesting, was not to prime the pump, kind of in the sense that Mike was talking about pumping oil in there. What they recommended was removing the top spark plugs and then pressurizing the crankcase with some shop air while you crank the engine with the starter. And pressurizing the crankcase basically would push the oil up into the pickup tube and get it into the oil pump. That was kind of an interesting approach that I
is interesting.
Wouldn't have thought of.
I would on some of these other engines that we've seen, we just unscrew the oil filter and pour oil down in the port, and then screw the oil filter back on. It goes right to the oil pump. Yeah, fills up the pump, and then screw the filter on, crank it up. You get oil pressure every time.
Yeah. Now it sounds like Mike doesn't have an oil filter. He has a screen.
Right. Yeah,
Correct.
you have the screen, which would be a whole lot more trouble to take off. It sounds like you have a solution.
But the question is why has it been getting
I don't know.
secularly worse over time?
This is a really bad first question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry. What I didn't mention, and I did notice this at one of my oil changes, this crush copper gasket has a split in it, and I believe
This is the crush gasket under the oil screen when you tighten the oil screen.
Yeah, and it's about I forget the EA number, but it's the dash number, but it's about 1 3/8 in diameter.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a black material inside that I observed.
It's not white?
I think it was black actually,
Okay.
but anyway,
Doesn't
and
matter. Okay.
I believe the proper placement of that is the split goes against the engine housing, and I'm not positive, but I think that housing may be magnesium, and
Probably.
I did notice that there was a lot of, I would almost call it moderate pitting that you couldn't see until you took the washer off.
I'm surprised that they would make anything out of magnesium because that's so prone to corrosion. It's
right. But and I didn't even notice that until I took this gasket off, and then I just with a little bit of light emery paper, I cleaned that up and got it smooth again. But I thought that might have been an ideal path for something as thin as air to penetrate over time, but the leak would be so small that viscous oil, even with it hot, would not be seen. And the assembly does not leak. I don't have any leaks on this engine to speak of.
But that didn't help.
I think a couple of times, I know I put some of the Permatex on that seal, but the assembly right below it, which was the oil pressure shuttle valve, has two, I believe they're flat copper gaskets, and we included that on this last annual. And again, I mean, to truly test this, I should maybe go away for the winter and then see what happens in the spring. But again, I've been flying it regularly, at least once or twice a week, and I've had no trouble whatsoever.
It's too bad you can't pressure test the system with
Out
soap, right? Soap and
of
water.
curiosity, what kind of oil do you use?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been using the Phillips multi-weight. I did try the Aeroshell 100 Plus based on a seminar I witnessed you, Mike, at Oshkosh, and how much you like the oil. And I'm back to the Phillips right now. This engine is over TBO, which is only 1,500 hours, and it's exhibiting, high time, end of life symptoms, high oil temperature, low oil pressure, a lot of oil consumption, and fouling the bottom plugs. And just ironically, when I wrote my request, it was way back in May, and I have just purchased a rebuilt engine, which ought to be installed next week. So that comes with a brand new oil pump assembly, which I'm looking forward to not having to deal with this anymore. But
didn't you say this engine was rebuilt in 1968 or something?
This was a military surplus engine that I got from the Civil Air Patrol. And the original run date on the engine was 1969, and it had been pickled and sat in a supply depot. I purchased it. I don't even want to tell you what I paid for it. I wish I had the money at the time. I could have bought more. But it was in one of those large cylindrical cans. And I'll bet you the enclosure was worth as much as the engine.
Yeah.
And
So-
it sat for all those years. And when we opened it up, the desiccant was still blue. Everything was still like pliable. And so
it's
now,
definitely past the 12-year TBO.
An engine in a can. That's a concept. That must
I
be
like
a
it.
heck of a can.
well,
One
again,
big can.
yeah.
I'd like to see the can opener used to open the can.
It had these like 5/8 diameter bolts, and there must have been about 50 of them all around.
The
The
can.
big thick
Wow.
rubber gasket.
Yeah. Did
Wow.
you keep the can?
No.
Oh,
Just the data point. The engine I took out had 2,200 hours. I mean, this is a 1,500-hour engine. It had 2,200 hours, and it was still working fine. And I sold it to a glider operator in New Jersey who ran it another 2 years. So I sent him the old engine in this container.
Oh,
And I mean, I'm a fan. And again, back to Mike, I've listened to you talk at Oshkosh, and I'm a little disappointed I wasn't able to get that much time, on this engine, but I guess it is time, and I'm still fortunate that I'm able to, to still get parts for these things.
well, don't get rid of your old engine.
Well, he's going to give me $2,500 for it.
Oh, okay.
selling it off.
And there's no way to just put a normal like 0470R in it or something. You have to use this.
There is an STC to put a Comanche 250 firewall forward, and they call that a super dog. You probably
That'd be a Lycoming.
It is.
They like them,
It is. I mean, someone may have done that, but the stock engine, when it's working well, it does a nice job.
Yeah, it just sounds like it's probably an engine that's no longer really well supported.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Yeah.
But anyway, is there, if I do run into this again, is there, now, Mike, you mentioned maybe pressurizing the crankcase.
Yeah, that seemed like a novel approach to repriming the pump, and it worked fine on the 421. Worked perfectly.
Yeah,
But that's just the Band-Aid, right? We want to find out why it's doing that.
right. The
Is it,
root cause.
Yeah, for sure.
is it possible to find the leak by pressurizing the crankcase and spraying the thing with a soapy bath? I mean,
Of course,
the leak is
Continental's answer might be, well, we didn't build these engines to sit around.
Yeah.
So, well,
I don't know.
well,
It'll be
your new
interesting to see if
engine
the new
hopefully will fix
engine holds its prime better.
yeah.
Yeah.
right. And
But clearly, the best answer is to just fly the airplane more often, right?
Yeah.
well, that's
That's
true.
That's always the right answer.
I'm very fortunate in my retirement that I have the time to do that. And we do
Yes.
have some good weather up here in the Northeast every once in a while. So,
Yeah.
well, folks,
I
I'm going to
guess-
thank you again.
You bet. Great question. And I guess that's the best solution for all of us is just keep flying as much as we can.
Sorry we didn't have, the perfect answer for you.
Well, I guess it's still a mystery.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mike, thank you for calling and
Okay. Thank you all again.
Thanks, Mike.
take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
So our next question is from Cameron, who's trying to protect the family treasure. So we have people calling from cars and offices, but never from the shop out
Oh, look
back
at that
with
thing.
the
tractor.
is that a
I've got a bit
tractor?
of
Is
the
that a
project on here,
skidder?
yeah. No, it's
Sorry?
a John Deere front end loader.
Front end loader. Okay, I can't see the whole thing there.
Very cool.
You caught me
Very
there.
cool. I hope there's an airplane part next to it.
That's down the street.
Oh, down the street. Okay. So what's up?
Well, I had a question about what type of oil I should be using in our Aranca. It would seem like using a thinner oil like the 2050 would be better for startup after it's been sitting for a little while instead of the W100 because it's thinner and it'll flow better. However, the 100 that I use or the W100 I use sticks to everything better. So I fly a lot in the wintertime and not a lot in the summertime because of what's sitting behind me. I spend my life in one of these. So
Yeah.
I get to fly when it's cold. But I do preheat, so it's not usually a large problem. But I was curious to know what you had to say about that.
Well, that's what multi-vis oil was made for, right? To be flow in the winter and work in the summer as well. I mean, I know Mike's not a big fan of multi-vis oil for other reasons.
Well, I am a big fan of multi-vis oil if you're flying in
Okay.
sub-freezing temperatures for sure.
So maybe
But I do
that's the
spend
right
quite a bit
one.
of time flying in sub-freezing temperatures, but startup, I usually have it heated, and the heater it comes out, or the hangar it comes out of, is about 50, 60 degrees. So it's not like I'm
Yeah,
out.
I mean,
started way below zero.
if you can reliably preheat every time, then there's no
I
problem.
can, unless I go somewhere and
using-
get stuck out on a ramp overnight. That's the only
Right.
concern.
Exactly.
And I'm
Exactly.
holding almost 9 quarts of oil in this little O300 because of the external filter that I have. So I've got plenty of oil.
That is a lot of oil.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
if I was flying in cold temperature region, I would probably use multi-vis.
So would you keep the multi-vis in there year round, or because what I've been doing is when it's when it's cold, I go to multi-vis. When it's hot, I keep the 100 in it.
That sounds like a great strategy to me.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I thought.
Corrosion is much more of an issue during the hot season when it's humid.
Mhm.
Not so much
Well,
when it's
I'm in the
cold.
high desert. Humidity doesn't exist here. I'm in Eastern Oregon.
Oh,
Oh,
great.
Eastern Oregon. Yeah. No, he's right. It's true.
Yeah.
And I do have a Tempest dehumidifier, like the gentleman before me was talking about. It pumps air through crystals, and I'm wondering if I might be a little bit overboard on all this.
I was
but
going to say, does
Yeah,
does it
your
ever get any
crystals never
moisture?
never turn color, right?
Yeah.
In that
it takes a long
situation,
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
in that situation, I might just consider using the multi-vis year round.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Because you really don't
My
have
brother
a
and I got the
corrosion
bill
issue.
for the overhaul on this engine, so that's why I'm very
Protected.
excited to keep it running for a long time.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I tend to like multi-viscosity personally because my airplane doesn't schedule its oil changes when the seasons change.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's kind of random, and I use the Phillips 15W or 20W50 cross country and some cam guard, but that's because I'm
exactly
lazy.
what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it's a lot cheaper than the other stuff.
Yeah, I think that for you, I think that's a great choice.
yeah, I do too.
Yep, I agree.
Oh, well, I appreciate it.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Well, that was
That's
a
exactly
very
what our mechanic told me
non-controversial
too.
question.
That's what your mechanic said. Yeah.
And an engine monitor is in the works, but I haven't quite got around to it. This is a strictly VFR airplane, so I'm a little leery about putting anything computerized in it except for my watch.
Well,
He said he said it's in the works because he doesn't want to get the lecture.
That's right. He doesn't want
yeah.
the lecture.
All right. Well, we'll let you go on that one, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have anything to do with being a VFR aircraft. Just saying, it doesn't make it fly better.
But next time you come on the show, you better have that installed.
That's right. We want to see proof.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. Thanks for the call.
All right, well,
That was
thank
good.
you, and thank you for answering my question.
See you,
All
Cameron.
right, Cameron. Enjoy.
Our next question is from Chuck, who is weighing different options. Go ahead, Chuck.
Hi, I'm a A&P, and I'm happily employed otherwise, though.
Yeah,
You're
I hear you.
one of the smart A&P.
But I'm looking to see if I can figure out a side hustle to use my A&P skills to make some extra money. So I've been considering doing a mobile weight and balance services for my local airports.
Interesting.
So as I started looking into the rules and to a business plan, I started thinking about what I needed to do with the fuel in the airplane. So I know in my experiences, usually I'm weighing either an aircraft completely defueled. Somebody's weed eating right next to me.
It's okay. Someone's
Or-
going to run an engine right behind me in a few minutes. Who knows?
Okay.
My rabbit's chewing behind me. Go ahead.
So either completely defuel the aircraft, defuel it except for the unusable fuel, or completely fill the aircraft before you weigh. So that's what I was thinking about. And I started looking into the 4313, and there it states that it recommends defueling, and then says in special cases, the aircraft may be weighed with full fuel in the tanks. And so that got me wondering what these special cases are. And is it an issue to just get my customers to fully fuel their airplanes? Because of course, that would be the easiest for me. Because if I had to defuel aircraft, I think my business plan would be sunk.
Exploded, blown
It's
out of
really
the water.
not that bad to defuel.
Defueling would be.
You don't think so? Yeah.
Oh, we do it all the time.
Yeah, but it's messy. I mean,
Well, we have 2 90-gallon tanks that are set low on rollers, so we can roll them underneath wings and do exactly that. So one thing, since you bring up weighing the airplane, and I have opinions, everybody has an opinion, but it seems bizarre to me that the proper procedures for weighing an airplane are not in the service manual. Do you know where they are? They're in the POH.
The POH, yeah.
As if a pilot owner is ever going to weigh the airplane.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me. So, having said that, because we weigh airplanes with some frequency, you have to go to the POH because the manufacturer is the first choice. If the manufacturer has a procedure, that's what you're supposed to follow.
Yep.
If they don't, then you can go to 4313. So every airplane that I've weighed is the POH says you're going to defuel it and add in the half a gallon for unusable or 2 gallons, whatever the airplane is. And you'll have it serviced with oil. But usually that service with oil, as you read through the process, it'll say, well, you can do it with no oil in, but then you mathematically put the oil back in. But you're only talking 8 quarts, 10 quarts, something like that. But they all, so far that I've messed with, they all call for defueling the airplane. And it doesn't include in the writing that you can weigh it with fuel. Now, we all understand the process of calculating it, but that is usually not included in the process.
so there's the FARs that he quoted. He said there are special cases where you
Well, it's
can
an
weigh it.
advisory
With,
No,
circular.
he was confused. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is an advisory circular. The
Yeah.
FARs don't say anything about it.
4313. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
AC
right.
4313. There's also an aircraft weight and balance handbook, and the verbiage is a little bit different in there. It's actually quite interesting reading. It says, if it is not feasible to drain the fuel, the tanks can be topped off to be sure of the quantity they contain and then weigh with full fuel. So it doesn't talk about any special cases for doing that. And every time I've weighed an aircraft, I don't like messing around with fuel in the hangar and defueling. I've just filled it up because I know pretty close what full is, and then I just weigh that, and then I can just subtract what full is and get the empty weight.
Well, we never defuel in the hangar, just
Okay.
safety thing. I got called out about the oil filter and the oil change earlier. So
Got to gain some ground back, Paul, right?
not trying to gain a little ground back here.
Okay.
We roll the airplanes outside and defuel, and that's a serious thing. Just safety tip: don't ever do defueling in the hangar, and use grounding wires always, everywhere. I cannot stress that enough. Anyway, sorry, squirrel. What were we talking about?
I mean, you could ask your customers to just fly around till they run out of fuel and then bring the airplane back to the airport. But that's probably
That sounds like something I would say, Colleen. Come
risky.
on.
Well, that's what we do at the races. We try to, empty one tank and then come down with minimum fuel so we don't have to, guess what we have. But I think it's easier to ask your customers to just bring the airplane fully fueled and then just weigh it like that.
It does make it a bit more difficult because the airplane's so much heavier to get it on the
On the scales.
the pad.
Scales. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's some airplanes, you can't just roll them up. The airplane has to be level.
Yep.
There are all sorts of specifications. A Cessna 210, for instance, if you use one of the newer models, if you remove all the nitrogen from the nose strut, fully collapse it, let all the air out of the nose tire, overinflate the main tires, it will not be level. You're going to have to add about another 1.5 to 2 inches under the mains
Wow.
to get the airplane level. So add that into your business
Okay,
thing.
so I've been quiet here. I can't stand it anymore.
Noticeably quiet, Mike.
Noticeably, yeah.
I just want to pose a pop quiz for my colleagues. So so you have this airplane that you want to weigh, and you have a POH that says to weigh it, you should defuel it. And then you have the weight and balance handbook that says it's fine to weigh it with full tanks. So my pop quiz question is, do you have your choice of which of those two pieces of guidance to follow, or do you have to follow the POH, which says you have to defuel it?
Ooh.
Okay, Colleen.
I think you have to use the TCDS note 1, which says the condition that the caveats for weighing the airplane.
Wait, what?
Right. The type certificate, note 1, which says what's unusable and what the leveling mean should be and all the details about weighing the airplane. Dead silence.
I never even
Are we
thought
on the
about
same
going to
planet?
type certificate data sheet.
That's what note 1 gives you. It gives you the details where the center of gravity is, the datum, and what is unusable fuel. And
But does that talk about
Right, but does it talk about the weighing
POH?
procedure? And
Yeah.
can you weigh it with full tanks and then subtract out the fuel, or
it does not.
Yeah.
okay, that's what I
That's
thought.
the
So
question.
I revert to my original question, which is
Which takes
you have
precedence, yeah.
which you have the weight and balance handbook, which Colleen cited, that says it's fine to do it with full tanks, and you have the POH, which Paul cited, that says you have to do it with empty tanks. So
I'd say
my
the POH,
question is,
it has to be the POH.
I generally go with the POH because
I'm not asking what you generally do, Paul.
Well, okay,
I'm asking
so
what you are
let me
required
rephrase
to do.
I use the POH.
There you go.
If there is a procedure written by the manufacturer, whether it's in the POH or the service manual, because both are accepted manuals and accepted procedures, I start there. If that doesn't have an allowance for doing it with fuel, then I do it without fuel. If it doesn't talk about the fuel, then I use some other, whether the weight and balance.
You keep avoiding my question, Paul.
No, I said I use the POH.
You keep saying what you do. I'm not asking what you do.
Oh, okay.
What a person is allowed to do under the regulations.
I think the regulation says you use the POH because that's what that's the procedure the manufacturer says to use.
Honk. Wrong.
He baits me every time.
This is what I've been quiet up till now.
I know. You let us dig the hole.
The regulation in question is FAR 4313A, which says that you shall use the methods, techniques, and practices prescribed by the manufacturer in its maintenance manual and instructions for continuing airworthiness. Doesn't say anything about POHs, or other acceptable methods and techniques and practices acceptable to the administrator. Now, the weight and balance handbook is an advisory circular. It is acceptable to the administrator. So you have your choice of doing it the way the manufacturer says or the way the weight and balance handbook says. Now, you don't have the option of using AC 4313-1B because the first page of AC 4313(1)B says, and I'm paraphrasing now, don't use anything in this book if the manufacturer has a procedure for it. This book is only to be used when the manufacturer doesn't have guidance. But I don't believe the weight and balance handbook starts out with something that says that.
I didn't read the beginning, but it's possible.
But at any rate, the point I'm trying to make is that the regulation says you either have to use the manufacturer's procedures or other procedures acceptable to the administrator, and anything in an advisory circular is acceptable to the administrator.
So I would like to know why.
So Chuck, do it any way you want to.
Clearly, a maintenance procedure why is it in the POH?
Because they didn't consider it maintenance. That's the only.
Why would they put it in a POH?
Yeah, my POH doesn't
do
have.
it.
I've never seen that in a POH. I thought you were actually misspoke when you said that. So
No,
I'm surprised to hear it's in a POH. Like what is the airplane owner supposed to do with that?
Is it in a Cessna 182 POH? And
yep,
is it
and it's in the Cirrus POH. And
Okay,
it's in the 210 POH. And
That seems very
pretty sure
misplaced.
it's in the Cardinal POH.
So one that drives one to the inescapable conclusion that weighing an aircraft is not considered maintenance.
Well, and I agree with that. You're not fixing something. You're not repairing something. You're not calibrating something.
you're establishing a baseline.
Almost everyone, and so I know this isn't regulation. I'm just talking about how it actually works in the real world. You don't take your airplane to a pilot to have it weighed. You take it to a maintenance shop. Nobody. So who can then weigh the airplane and put the results in the POH as a revision to your weight and balance? Who
Chuck
can sign that off?
Chuck can. That's
Chuck
his business
can.
model. He went to school.
So I
for
mean,
this.
can a pilot
Well, that's
an
very
owner
interesting.
of
'cause
the
we've
airplane
always-
weigh the airplane with calibrated scales, take the results, and put those results in his POH as his official, legal, revised weight and balance?
Yeah, and we always thought the answer to that was no, but maybe the answer to that is yes. If the FAA does not consider weighing an aircraft to be a maintenance operation, then it wouldn't require a mechanic certificate to do it.
Let's ask for an interpretation.
Ooh,
No, let's not do that.
We should.
I think
Yes,
we should, but
while I have Laura Megan's posh ear,
We'll call it the Chuck interpretation.
can we
I'll hit
please
her
send it to
hit her with another request.
Can we select who it goes to, though? We don't want it to go to.
Is there
where the
someone
Moss
else we could
interpretation-
talk to up there?
Yeah,
right.
we don't want it to go to the same lawyer that wrote the.
Interesting. I thought this one was
Well,
obvious.
we really miss Skip Aberman, don't we? He retired
no
a couple
kidding.
of years ago, and
He was awesome.
he was the lawyer that did all the maintenance interpretations, and he was really wonderful. But he's now retired, and now he has. Let's just say his shoes are hard to fill.
Yeah.
So Chuck, back to your question.
Oh,
Are
did we
you-
answer the question? I
No,
forgot what it was.
we kind of went off on a rabbit hole. But are you concerned about the possibility of defueling customers' airplanes? Would you like to avoid that?
I would like to avoid that, because I'm imagining being a mobile service, and I just don't want to have to deal with that with fuel.
It's a big added expense.
Yeah.
Do you have to pump it back up, Paul, when you're done? You have some kind of pump?
Well,
or you just
either
pour
that
it?
or they don't ever fly their airplane again. I mean, or they buy fuel somewhere else.
Well,
But we do. We have filters. So we filter it back.
I suggest you do it how you want, Chuck, and then sign the logbook entry that says that you did the weighing in accordance with advisory circular, whatever it is,
There you go.
weight and balance handbook.
For the weight and balance handbook. Yep.
Yeah,
So another little
I'm
detail.
okay with that.
Be aware, we had a shop. This has been a very long time ago. The shop no longer exists in Memphis that weighed a whole bunch of airplanes. And what they did not do is put the airplane in its standard configuration. In other words, everything that was on the equipment list has to be in the airplane, and what isn't on the equipment list should be removed from the airplane or somehow accounted for.
I mean, like the tow bar.
Tow bar is a good example. If the tow bar is on the list, it has to be clipped in its proper position or whatever. Fire extinguishers, most airplanes do not have to have fire extinguishers, and it's an add-on that was never added to the weight and balance. The Memphis FSDO found out about this, and it was a big hooty-doo. Every airplane that they weighed for about the previous 5 years had to get reweighed. I don't know how they did it. I just remember one of the 135 Navajos that we were maintaining at the time. They came over and said, "You can't fly the airplane." I said, "But you don't have anything in writing." And so they told me all the things that were wrong. And I said, "Well, we'll just reweigh it, and then we won't have to worry about it." So I didn't get involved in any of the other airplanes. I just know it was a big do. And
So
the shop
we don't want
did a lot
to
of
read
leeway.
about you, Chuck, in AvWeb Flash. You
That's
know?
right.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
get it right the first time.
Get it right.
Yeah.
So
And
so
do y'all-
if we weigh the airplane with the tanks full, which the advisory circular says you can do, do you have to compensate for temperature because the tanks hold different amount of fuel depending on how hot the fuel is?
Yep.
Yeah, you'd
So-
have to take into account the environmentals and get a specific gravity.
Specific
I
gravity
guess, yeah.
test. Yeah. The handbook mentions that. I've never done it, but yeah.
I just drain the tanks.
Do y'all have any other ideas for A&P side hustles?
Prop balance.
Yeah. Do you do pre-buys? Mobile pre-buys are hot right now.
Oh,
Pre-buys
yeah.
are hot. Propeller balancing is
if you want to
Top
go into the
balancing.
mobile pre-buy business, we can give you all the business you can need.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
desperate need for that. So if you like to travel,
All right.
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah.
getting to be impossible to get a pre-buy done because all the shops have shop schedules that are booked up for a month for a year in advance. And so a mobile pre-buy, we there are some mechanics that are doing that. And Paul does a lot of that actually.
yeah.
Yep.
And there's some other guys that we work with that do mobile pre-buys, but there's a huge demand for that right now. So,
And they pay a premium if I leave the office to do a pre-buy. I'm not gouging, but it's worth a lot for me to leave home, stay away from home and all that. And I only do pre-buys on Cirrus and Cessna 210s.
Yeah, you might focus on something
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
be
Pick one
good.
you know well. You don't
Mhm.
want to
All
get
right.
caught missing something obvious.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time today.
Yeah.
Thank
We
you for
enjoyed it.
calling. It was a good question.
good luck with your side hustle, Chuck.
All right. Thanks.
Do mobile pre-buys, not
Okay.
that's our advice.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Chuck.
Bye-bye. Our next question is from Jared, who is looking for a more permanent oil filter solution. Go ahead, Jared.
Hey, well, I have a couple of questions. One is about using reusable filters, but another is about using just less of the disposable filters. You know, in an ideal situation, we're changing the oil every 4 months, 3 times a year. In an ideal situation, we would have, say, 20 hours on that oil and or something like that. But sometimes if there's maintenance or bad weather, life gets in the way, all these things, we might have 5 or 6 hours on that oil. And my question, first question would be, is there ever a time when we might skip changing the oil filter when we're changing the oil, just to reduce the consumption, the cost, the time, the possibility for mistakes, and that sort of thing?
More filters in the garbage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually fairly common. And there's no like requirement to change a filter, except during annual inspection when we're required to inspect the filter, which is kind of hard to take it off and take it apart and put it back on. So yeah, you can do that. And especially if your filters are fairly clean, you're not worried about them getting all clogged up, so to speak. So I might know a guy that has taken oil and filters past 100 hours, I might know more than one guy or gal that's done that, just saying. And the engine didn't explode. It was amazing.
Yeah, well, I would like to challenge almost everything Paul just said.
Sometimes I say things just so Michael challenges.
First of all, when we've seen people take oil to way past 50 hours, the engine didn't explode, but the oil analysis looked really, really bad, and it's clear that the oil was seriously contaminated. So I definitely would not encourage people to go past 50.
He's not
hours.
even.
Don't
Jared's
take
not
what I
even
said.
flying 100 hours.
Well,
He's saying
Paul,
encouragement.
when you say that people have taken it to 100 hours and the engine didn't explode, that's sort of an invitation for people to take it to 100 hours. I didn't want that to.
Okay, well, no, that is not what I intended. There was no wink, nod in that at all.
But the direct question you asked, which was, would it make sense to just change the oil and not change the filter? My take on that is I would like to be able to inspect the filter as often as possible. It's the most important thing that we do to assess engine condition. And I would not want to miss. I mean, if I were king, I would make filters that had that were transparent, so you could look in them anytime you
that's
did
cool.
a pre-flight. But failing that, I think we should. It's not that much work to change the filter when you're doing an oil change, and to me, just the opportunity to inspect it and to make sure nothing is coming apart.
But Jared did make a good comment that filters were very dear at one point. We couldn't get them. So, and they are becoming expensive, more and more expensive.
That's another issue. And I will confess to you that sometime before AirVenture, I decided to change to the Challenger reusable filter on my Cessna 310, and I was basically doing this as an experiment, and I don't have enough experience with it yet to really make any profound announcements, because I've now only had an opportunity to do one oil change since the Challenger filter went on. But it was an interesting experience to instead of cutting open a filter with a filter cutter and inspecting it and then getting a new filter out of the box, because I buy them by the dozen because I fly a twin. I use a lot of filters. But basically the Challenger filter comes off, you give it a quarter turn, and the filter element comes out of the can. You take it over to, I have a clear glass Pyrex bowl that I wash the filter into so that I can see exactly what came out of it. And so I've done this once now, well, twice, because once on each engine. But I was actually quite astonished at what came out of that filter. There was a huge mound of stuff in the bottom of the bowl. And when I first saw it, I completely freaked out. And then I started to inspect the stuff that was in the bottom of the bowl, which is a whole lot easier to inspect than when it's sitting in paper media, embedded in the media. And I was able to satisfy myself that this big mound of stuff that came out of the filter was all carbon, because it would disintegrate when I took a pinch of it and rubbed it between my fingers. But it was an amazing amount of stuff that came out of there. And I'm sure that same amazing amount of stuff was in paper filters, but it wasn't visible to me. So I became kind of a big fan of this, washing it out into a clear bowl so you can actually see it. rather than trying to inspect it on media. I have not yet had the experience of finding metal in the filter, fortunately.
Did you run a magnet down in there to see if any ferrous materials were in it?
I actually did not do that, Paul. That certainly would be a good idea. I just, it all looked black, and I pretty much satisfied myself that there wasn't any metal in it, just by doing the finger pinch maneuver.
I know Colleen was talking about doing this. Have you done it yet, Colleen?
No.
Yeah.
And my one question to Mike on behalf of Jared, because he's also interested in reusable filters, is how many disposable filters do you need to buy to make up for the cost of a Challenger filter?
Well, I did some math on that the
Thank
last
you.
time we talked about this.
Mhm.
So the Challenger is about $350, Mike, for each one. And you pay $35 a piece these days for an oil filter.
Or more, yeah.
And there is an airworthiness limitation on the Challenger. At 1,250 hours, you have to toss the filter element and put a new one in, or 5 years. So you got 5 years basically before you have to replace the element. I didn't see how much that cost. $450 versus, I'm sorry. So $35 times the however many oil changes you do in 1,250 hours, if you want to work that up. So if you do once every 50 hours, you got 24 changes. That's a lot of money.
That's a half as much as
that's
buying them.
$800 and something bucks.
And then
it is.
You're saving all that stuff out of the landfill. And I know not everybody cares about green stuff, but some people do. And
Well, everybody should.
Well,
Everybody
one of the big things for me was it eliminates this business about having to cut the filter can,
which is always a risk.
to me is it's always messy.
Yeah, totally.
And one of the interesting things that I discovered was, and the filters in my airplane are mounted right side up, with the flange on the bottom and the nut on the top.
Disaster.
Which makes it hard to remove them neatly without spilling. I do it pretty well, but there's always a whole lot of paper towels that have to be strategically arranged and everything. The Challenger filter, when it came off, there was basically no mess at all, and I couldn't understand why, and I figured out why, and it's interesting. The paper filters all have a drain back valve in them, a little rubber check valve that prevents the oil from running back down into the engine after the engine stops. The Challenger filter doesn't have a drain back valve. It has a pressure relief valve, but it doesn't have a drain back valve. So when you remove the Challenger filter, it's basically empty, and it's almost completely mess free.
Okay, I'm sold.
And then there's no can cutter routine to go through. The element just pops right out, and you wash it down with. I use brake cleaner to wash it all into this glass bowl where I can look at it and futz with it. And now I'm going to run a magnet through it. Now that Paul suggested that, but I came away. I started out very dubious, and I thought, this reusable thing's going to be a mess. You got to clean it and put it back together and everything. And it turned out to be much less of a mess than the paper filter thing. I'm
a little curious how that's going to work. Some of the old, especially Continental engines, have a problem with the oil pumps becoming unprimed. And I don't know.
That question's coming up next.
Oh,
Paul
sorry.
didn't read the questions.
I didn't read the questions. But I don't know that this would contribute or not. The fact that it doesn't have a drain valve, I don't think it would, but I mean, I'd really have to think through the process. But the idea is, so we do a lot of Cirrus work, which has the IO 550s, and that right side up oil filter is a real pain. And
Yeah.
it's a lot of cleaning involved. That's pretty compelling, just that part of the discussion.
I agree.
Well, like I said, I decided to do it as an experiment, and I haven't had these things long enough to really feel like I'm prepared to, write a Consumer Reports article on them or anything. But my first impression from the first oil change using them was much more positive than I expected.
So something else that occurred to me since you mentioned that about all the extra debris. In this group, you don't have to say correct me if I'm wrong because it'll happen. But so if I remember correctly, I'll say it that way. The paper filters are 40 micron, and the Challenger filter, when I was looking at it, is like 22 micron filter. Did you check into that?
I did, and actually, it's almost not an apples to apples comparison. It's very, very interesting. The Challenger filter uses a filter element that's basically some sort of medical grade aluminum that is perforated with very tiny holes that are made with a laser. It's probably
Like the leading
really
edge TKS wing.
I guess something like that. And so the hole size in the Challenger filter is very well defined. Every hole in the filter media is exactly the same size, and it's a highly deterministic thing. Paper filters are different. Paper filters are inherently very, very random, and when they come up with a micron rating on a paper filter, it's based on statistics. It's like,
interesting.
there's an 85% probability that a particle of 40 microns will be caught. And if it's not caught the first time it gets through the filter, then there's an 85% chance it'll be caught the second time through the filter. So you can't take the micron rating of a paper filter and the micron rating of one of these aluminum reusable filters and compare them apple to apples. They're not really measuring exactly the same thing.
So here's another. Sorry, I'm kind of belaboring this because it's not recently, but months and months ago when we first started talking about this, I started looking into it, and I have not had the guts to ask Continental if a Challenger filter was installed on a new engine, if that would have any implication on warranty, which is a big deal. For instance, Cirrus owners, it's very specific that they have to do certain inspections. You can't just do an oil change at 50 hours. You do a 50-hour inspection. And Continental is if you make any modifications to their engines, then they have the choice to void the warranty. And this really isn't a modification to the engine, but I'll bet you it's not on the list of filters that Continental approves. I'll have to look into that, but it's a thought to consider.
Are we going to let Jared talk?
Well, Jared has been away. I don't know where Jared went.
He's right here.
My connection died for a second.
Yeah.
So it sounds like for using fewer hours per oil change, the economics probably work even better because of the limitation of hours, in terms of reaching that 1,200 hour limit. If I'm not changing every 50 hours, if I'm changing every 20 or whatever it is, we could actually even get better value out of the reusable. And I was glad to hear that Mike's trying it out. And I'm curious if you'd see any movement of the needle in your oil analysis, or do you have enough data about that yet?
No, I don't. I really don't have enough data about it yet. I did notice that the oil pressure comes up a little quicker after I start the engine. And actually, that was one of the real claims to fame of these Challenger filters, is that they present a lot less back pressure. There's a lot less pressure loss across the filter. These filter elements were actually originally designed for race cars. That's where this technology came from, and then they got they got developed in more broadly for automotive use, and then Challenger, I guess, acquired the rights to provide them for aircraft use. And the aircraft filter is almost identical to the automotive version, except that it has a hex nut on the top, so you can torque it, and you don't have to use a strap wrench in it, and it has little holes drilled in it for safety wire, which the automotive ones don't have. But other than that, I think they're basically identical.
And it's the same size as an aeroshell filter or Tempest filter, right? I mean,
It's physically much smaller. I mean,
oh, well, that's even better, really.
It has the same base thing, but it's tiny compared to any paper. It's smaller than the short filters, and I used the long filters, the tall filters, and it's way smaller than that.
Wow.
That'll make an awful lot of mechanics at our shop doing filters on Cirrus with the
with
the air conditioner on the back.
Intercoolers.
Oh no, oh gosh, it's interesting. Great question. And just to reiterate, I am not encouraging anybody to go 100 hours on their oil.
CYA.
yeah, absolutely. None of that was ever done intentionally.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for the discussion.
Yeah, great question. I never considered not changing the filter, but why? What's not to like? I mean, the amount of oil that's left in the filter is very tiny. So there's some dirty oil you're not getting out, but and Mike's comment about not being able to inspect it was something I hadn't thought about, leaving it on. But if you're only float 20 hours, how much can happen in 20 hours? Right, Mike?
A lot can happen.
I will say that I have had a particular customer ask me the same question because he wanted to do his own oil changes. And I'm very hopeful that he is not listening, but I told him, oh yeah, you should definitely leave that oil filter on there. It doesn't need to come off. We will change it when it comes in next time, because this particular guy and a wrench, I did not want him turning a wrench on his airplane. So
I hope he's not listening.
I hope he's not listening.
Oh, good question.
He's the only
Jared.
one I've ever told that. So if he hears that, he'll know it's him. Well, I should have made that. I should have said that different. I know a guy.
We're going to cut Paul off here. Paul, you're digging your hole deeper. Thank you, Jared. That was a great question. Thanks for the, prompting a good discussion here.
Thank you.
Looks like it's time to wrap this podcast up. The questions keep getting tougher and tougher. How about some easy ones next time? Just kidding. Email us at podcasts@aopa.org with your gnarly questions, and we'll do our best to answer them.
See you next time.
Bye-bye, everybody.